In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, we begin with the greeting words of paradise. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I want to welcome you here tonight to our program and our discussion concerning the holidays and concerning how Muslims can find their proper position in the changing world that we are here in the West. Muslims have come to this part of the world from all over the planet. And when they arrived in the Americas and in Europe, their understanding was that the dominant religion was the religion of the people of the book. And so it was understood that Christianity and Judaism and the symbols concerning Moses and Jesus would be the basic way that people would structure and order their lives. But when we came to this part of the world, we understood and we found a series of different symbols and signs and traditions all sort of mixed up together in a hodgepodge. And it has really created almost the need to become investigators, to try to look at the history of people living in this part of the world, to try to understand how culture influences society, and then to look through this at our present situation in the world and where we are going in the future. We have to remember that the world is a global village, and that people's influence on each other now is profound, that what goes on in a village in India or by the Great Wall of China is brought into the homes of people in America and in Europe constantly. And so it is important for Muslims especially, and people of conscience, to have basira, and that is the insight and the knowledge of history and the knowledge of what is going on around them, and the ability to take that history and that insight and put it into a proper perspective so that we can know what to do in the years to come. In the Quran, in a very important chapter called Surah An-Nahl, this is the chapter of the bee, and verse 36, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ هَدَى اللَّهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ حَقَّتْ عَلَيْهِ الضَّلَالَةُ فَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. In this verse we are informed, and surely we have sent to every nation a messenger, that they would worship Allah and avoid false gods. Some of them Allah guided, and some were established in error. So travel through the earth and see what was the end of those who denied the truth. And so from this verse, we understand that Allah has raised up people in different parts of the world and given them the understanding to reflect upon the universe, given them the ability to choose between right and wrong. And there are some people who have established the way of Tawheed, and that is the way of the belief in the one God. And so we are taught that prophets were sent to every nation and every tribe. So prophets came to China, prophets came to India, prophets came to Africa, prophets came to Europe, to the Americas. In the folk tradition of every culture on the planet, you will see some discussion about one God. It was interesting to find out, and following this verse, Allah tells us, travel in the earth. And so it was interesting to note on journeys that I took through China and Asia and Africa and the Americas, that people have within their folk tradition the belief in one God. In ancient Egypt, a pharaoh by the name of Akhenaten, whose wife was Nefertiti, taught the belief in one God. And he actually taught the ancient Egyptians, and you'll find this in the Nile Valley, he taught the ancient Egyptians that they should not bow down to the sun, they should not bow down to idols, they should not bow down to the created things, but they should worship the power behind the sun. You also find in Central Africa the Bantu people, that the concept of N2, which really means the cosmic spirit, that they used to focus not just on the living things, but they focused on a universal force that actually engineered and gave fuel and power to the whole of the universe. And so they sought that great spirit. Also within the traditions of the Cherokee Nation and the Iroquois and many of the peoples in the Americas, we find strong belief in one God. And so it is our firm understanding, based upon the Quran and also based upon history, that people started off with a concept of one God. But at the same time, because we are beings who are bound by taste and hear and sight and smell, because we are bound by our senses, then many people found it easier to worship the powers that they could see. So therefore they focused on living things. If they lived in the desert, for instance, and there was large trees in the desert or rocks, they would focus their worship, their reverence, their feeling on the rock or the tree. If they lived by a great river, as the Nile or the Ganges or the Niger or the Amazon, the people would focus on the river and actually feel that the river had mystical power or spiritual power because life was coming from the river. And so the concept is now, how do we look at the powers in the universe? How do we look at our own life? And if we need benefit in this world, if we need protection from evil, then which source do we focus on in order to gain that benefit or to gain that protection? People, as I said, focused on the created things. And so we find a number of different traditions developing based upon varying symbols and signs. Probably the most oft worshipped symbol or sign within the ancient world was the sun. Because the sun obviously is the largest physical representation that you will find. The sun is giving life. The sun is giving warmth. The sun gives you the light during the day. And so when you are living in a country where it is very cold and the darkness comes and the light is gone, that darkness along with cold represents death. So the people would then focus on the sun, hoping that the sun would return, or the power of the sun would return and then give them light. And so we find a number of cults or religions developing around the sun. And what is interesting to note is that these cults or ways of life are profoundly affecting us today.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, everybody!
Let us take a look at how these seasons and how these concepts now influence people in this part of the world, and how this has affected the people of the book and the people of Tawheed. During the winter solstice, it was understood by the people in the northern countries that the celebrations they carried out, that the symbols that they placed into their homes, that the objects that they revered at this time would have a profound effect upon their existence. And just imagine now, if you are living in a northern country and it's snowing out, it is freezing, and you don't have central heating. It's a very serious situation. And people actually found that during the winter seasons, many of their family would die. And so therefore, a number of ceremonies and programs developed surrounding the winter solstice and how the people could then bring back the power of the sun. In the northern countries, the Feast of the 12 Nights stretched from December 25th to January 6th. In their concept, and this is in France and in England and the Anglo-Saxon countries, they had a concept of the winter being a cruel ice giant, and that the sun god and the south wind represented life. And so there was a series of events that went on between December 25th and January 6th, and now you see January 7th is Christmas for some of the people in the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Greeks had a ceremony called the Bacchanalia, and this was developed for their god of wine and sport, Bacchus. This was on December 21st. The Romans had the Saturnalia for their main sun god, whose name was Saturn. And they would go to their colosseums, and there would be gladiators there, and they would sacrifice some of the Christians, to wild animals, and the gladiators would fight themselves. And if the Roman emperor wanted one gladiator to kill the other one, at the point of death, he would give the symbol. If he wanted him to live, he would give the upward symbol that we are still using today. And what is interesting is that when Christianity became very powerful in Rome, the sacrifice of Christians stopped, and it was replaced by little dolls that they would give to each other as gifts.